You've worked with everyone from the Obama to the Clinton administrations, and that paved the way for what you do now, which is help impact-driven organizations.
We're really focused on transformational change, and maybe we can do something to help those folks with really big ideas and solutions, trying to get their footing and get going. There was a day where I was in a meeting and I kind of looked around and I was like, wow, the only school district I know anything about is my nice suburban school district in the Boston area. Yeah. So how the heck am I working on education for American school children? And that's when we started Equal Innovation and tried to figure out, how do we find those people? I think what's great about entrepreneurs is that they want to find you. They want to tell you what they're doing. They also want to tell you about the problem they're solving. I think the global health stuff is super exciting, about how to prevent a lot of health problems. That excites me more than anything else. If you want to do it fast, you have to have the business mindset and the business model.
Nish, welcome. And thank you for joining. You are the founder and CEO of Equal Innovations. You've worked with everyone from the Obama to the Clinton administrations, and that paved the way for what you do now, which is help impact-driven organizations. Mm-hmm. You're connecting funding to basically people who do good stuff. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah. First, Mikey, thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. And yeah, we're really focused on transformational change and who's working on that, and how do we help them to at least have a fighting chance to succeed. And so, having been able to work with some amazing people, some amazing places, that was the one thing that I felt like nobody was thinking about. And, maybe we can do something to help those folks with really big ideas and solutions, trying to get their footing and get going.
Yeah, that makes sense. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey from the government to what you do now, and how did you define who those folks are? How did you end up?
Yeah, definitely. So, I started my career in the Clinton administration. I always tell the story that first of all, it was amazing to be in the early 20s, to walk around the White House, to walk around Washington, State Department, UN, and be in these big meetings. And then there was a day where I was in a meeting at the Department of Education, and I spent a short time working in the office of the Secretary of Education. And I kind of looked around and I was like, wow, the only school district I know anything about is my nice suburban school district in the Boston area. Yeah. So how the heck am I working on education for American school children who are in a real diverse set of places, urban, rural, South, West, when my only frame of reference is, probably as nice as you can get in terms of schools and support and all that. So that was when I sort of realized that the federal government is really important, but only if you know what you're doing at the grassroots level, and you can bring it back and sort of, really help coordinate and think about things in the big picture after the local picture. And so at the end of the Clinton years, I moved back to Boston. I think, one of the interesting things going on at the time was also this real rise of the private sector in these areas. And so, the Gates Foundation started. There's this whole concept of impact investing, where people were going to invest in companies, but they were also going to try to make a difference with those investments. So all this stuff started happening right around the same time as I was sort of growing up professionally. And so when I was in Boston, I ran a charitable foundation for a while. I ran a couple of nonprofits and was really learning a lot. I spent a lot of time in the Boston area, which is where I'm from, and spent most of my life. And so it was great to learn about the different issues facing Greater Boston, facing New England. I also spent a lot of time in India, working there on international development issues. India is an interesting country. It's got vibrant culture. It's obviously a country of my parents' roots, but also there's a lot of wealth, and there's a lot of poverty, and a lot of challenges of clean water, energy, medicine, education. Sort of huge global challenges, right? With hundreds of millions of kids where you're trying to reach. So just astounding numbers. And that journey, sort of led me to start thinking about this idea of entrepreneurs and, solutions that scale rapidly. And so we think about that in the tech sector all the time. You start a tech startup, a website, whatever it is, and then you figure out how to scale up to 5 million viewers. Hopefully your podcast here will get to 5 million listeners, right? So that's how we think about scale usually, in the United States and with tech. And so I started thinking about, well, we keep talking about clean water for everybody in the world, but who's actually building the clean water filters? Who's building the tech for that? And then how do we then figure out how to help those folks to find the right funders, the partners, so that they can actually scale? And so I worked on that in the nonprofit sector, went back to the Obama administration, tried setting up some of those programs in the United States. And then sort of a couple of years ago, after I'd left the Obama White House, come back to Boston, I was still sort of bothered by that problem. I was thinking, why is it that, we're working on climate change and everybody knows it and the whole world is thinking about it, and yet we're not really thinking of solutions that can be scaled? Somehow, being connected to our friends online, everybody's thinking about that and starting social media sites every 2 minutes. But clean water for everybody, clean air for everybody is like stuck in the mud, and we can't find those solutions. So what's the problem? And that's when we started Equal Innovation and tried to figure out, how do we find those people, first of all, who are developing, solutions for, keeping women safe as they, walk at night in cities, or again, sort of clean water, clean solar power in villages. How do we find all these people? And then how do we find the people who are interested in funding them? And that isn't always like a match. They don't all live in, California, or all live in Massachusetts. So they're going to live one place, they're going to work another. And how do we do a better job matching the two, so that if we can find really good solutions, for different problems in the world, then we actually, are able to help them to grow and have the impact that we hope they can be. So for me, it was kind of a journey from big government down to the smallest entrepreneur working, in a village in India, a village in Africa, and then saying, hey, maybe my job is to be the connector of all these people.
That's incredible. Because my question was going to be, what is that? I mean, a stark difference when big government, like the White House, right, like
Yeah.
bureaucracy incarnate, to like the ground
Hmm.
floor, right? And like, how do you find the people, and how do you make
Right.
anything happen when there's such a massive difference between the entrepreneur and like
Mhm.
government?
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. For me, it was sort of that part of it wasn't super hard, because I think what's great about um, entrepreneurs is that they want to find you, they want to tell you what they're doing, they also want to tell you about the problem they're solving, right? So they'll come to you and say, hey, I'm working on AI in education, and here's what that means, here's what AI could do in education, here's why kids could learn better, and I have this great product I'm building, and can you help me find a funder, can you help me find a school district that'll let me pilot my tech? So entrepreneurs will find you. But I think for me, what was really interesting was, just that, saying, all right, I'm in a big bureaucracy, I'm in a big organization.
Right.
They just have to do what they do every day. They don't have time to figure out how one school district can benefit from this AI software. They have to think about thousands of schools at the same time. And if you're them, you can't say we're going to put all our eggs in this basket of this one AI software or this one clean water filter. That's too risky. And so, for me, it was like, all right, we're going to have to think about, I'm going to have to get out if I'm going to think about these problems differently. And I think what was interesting is in the late 90s, when I was in the Clinton White House, that's when the first internet, boom sort of happened. And so you're kind of watching all this Hotmail, Yahoo, pets.com, all that stuff happening. And you're just learning a lot, just watching other people try this out, and say, oh, we're just going to scale this up and everybody's going to go to our website and that's how we're going to get news. And so watching that and saying, hey, how do we apply that to these global problems? And I think the first experience I had with that was actually there was a hurricane in Central America, which was called Hurricane Mitch. And this was like 1999.
Okay.
And that was the first time we used the internet to raise money for international tragedies like that. And so it was kind of like I was in government, but I was building the plane as we were flying it, so to speak. So we were sort of putting online the information about the hurricane and how people can help. Contact information. We were figuring out how to do online donations, which didn't work back then. It was still too new. So all that stuff. So kind of watching that happen, seeing the power of the internet, and saying, "Hey, I think this is where the future lies if we're going to solve a lot of problems in the world."
Yeah, that makes sense. That was the beginning of the internet. So what happened since then? Was that the beginning of Equal Innovation, and you've grown basically since that moment?
No, we just started about 8 years ago, and but the concept stayed with me. And so one of the charitable foundations I was leading was called the Deshpande Foundation, and that was a successful family in the Boston area. They had started the patriarch Adesh Deshpande had about four different companies that were worth over $1 billion. So he really knew how to build companies. And one of the things he noticed was the places like Boston, San Francisco, really all of California, Boston, New York. You could be an immigrant. You could show up with no networks, no money. You could be somebody who's not a blue blood. You could show up and you could actually build, organizations like people invested in you. And he was really started thinking, how do you do this in other places? Like, how do you go to New Orleans? How do you go to Flint, Michigan, and support entrepreneurs, who have new ideas and not worry about where they're from or what school they went to. Just sort of trust them. That's sort of the ethos of Silicon Valley that's made it really the top place in the world for that. And so he was interested in how do you do that as a philanthropy. For me, that was fascinating because I think that's part of how we do we should be doing economic development in the United States, but also this idea of once you started doing that, you see all this cool innovation, right? So we did a lot of work in India, and you'd see people just creating the most amazing stuff. It's not necessarily even high tech, just like solutions that work, really simple. We're gonna and then business models that were really interesting. Like we one company in India did something simple. They were hiring women as security guards to help in corporate offices in Bangalore. And you think to yourself, well, that's pretty obvious. And no, it wasn't. In 2007, there were almost no women working as security guards. And so, but there was a need. And so, like any entrepreneur, they fit it. And in India, that was a big deal because it was also a cultural shift. It was, bringing women into a specific occupation where they never were expected to be. And so, or another guy who's just looking at sort of the state of like ponds and lakes in villages and saying, what, if we clean this up, even if we do it manually, like we can provide drinking water for at least for animals and irrigation, water. And so let's just get to work. So that's not even like tech innovation. That's simply looking at a problem and saying, I can build some sort of a business model around this that's scalable and needed all over that part of India. So I got really excited about seeing stuff like that. And so a couple of years later, after doing the foundation and the Obama thing, that's when I got to the idea of that we need to actually have an organization that focuses on this and just helps entrepreneurs to find funders and partners and places where they can try out their technology or their products and see what happens.
Cool. How do you vet the entrepreneurs, given that you've got probably such a wide berth of person with an idea and really wants to help versus maybe someone else who has already funding or more skill sets, right? Like, do you try to equal the playing field there, or how does that work usually?
Yeah, so for the most part, we rely on partners in the field. So one of the things we did was create a network of universities and a network of startup accelerators, academic hospitals, different government programs. And so by our estimation, there's about 5,000 such programs around the world. These are innovation centers that do like research and innovation. And then there's entrepreneurship programs that help entrepreneurs to write their business plan, to do the pitch, to do the get some mentorship. And so our estimate is there's about 5,000 around the world. We have in our network about 3,500 of those, and I mean, obviously, all of those, just like any network, not everybody's active, but a good chunk of those folks are active. And our model is really simple. It's to ask them to nominate the entrepreneurs in their programs that are best suited for whatever our clients or our partners are asking about. So, for example, we recently had a client who's interested in biodiversity and conservation in Southeast Asia, right? So they were looking at Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, very interested in biodiversity there, lots of jungles, lots of ocean, those sorts of things, marine coral reefs, all that. And so as they were thinking about that, they called us and said, hey, we're funding some NGOs there and we're funding some community work. We also want to fund some innovation in this area, some people that maybe don't pop up on our radar who are doing cool stuff. And so we rely on partners on the ground, which are, generally these accelerators and universities, and we'll go to them and we'll say, hey, we're looking at, who's got some solutions in biodiversity, ocean conservation, wildlife, that are relevant for Southeast Asia. And so that sometimes is interesting, because sometimes it's stuff that's there. So somebody in Kuala Lumpur might say, yeah, we just had this thing, this biodiversity tracking software come out of our labs. And so that's a great solution. But we might have somebody in South America who says, I'm working in the Amazon, which is also a tropical rainforest and similar climate. And we think that solution could apply in Malaysia and Indonesia. And we've always wanted to expand there. And so, but we don't do the vetting. We'll rely on our partners. They'll tell us, and just, for your listeners who don't know how accelerators work, this is what they do, right? They evaluate business plans, they select the most promising entrepreneurs, and then they usually put them through usually a 6-month boot camp to help them, work through their ideas, to, sort of meet with customers, with funders. And so when we trust those accelerators to nominate startups, it's actually a great fit because they've already done all the due diligence, and they can tell us and say, yeah, this is the right fit, or, we have another thing, but they're not ready yet, or sorry, we don't have anything in this space. So we found that going through our partners is an incredibly efficient way to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're global. You're not just India and the US, sounds like.
We are global. Yeah. I mean, realistically, I would say maybe 60% of our work, probably even 60 to 70% of our work is US or India. But that's also because those are the two largest countries for entrepreneurship. For them, China is there, but unfortunately, we can't do a lot in China because of geopolitics. But outside of China and Russia, you got India, U.S., Brazil, and so that ends up being a lot of our work. But we do have a light footprint in many parts of the world.
Well, I thought it was cool what you had mentioned, and I'm going to butcher this because you said somewhere in South America, or you said Malaysia. Point being, you saw a technology in one place, and you thought this could also work somewhere else. And that's interesting because you guys now have a bird's eye view of all of this innovative impact stuff. And are you actively like sort of assessing that playing field and saying, oh, this new, water purification technology is perfect for this other entrepreneur who needs that to plug into their project? Like, do you do that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's exactly where we hope to be. I think we do it okay right now. We're sort of still a small company, so we do it okay. But that's exactly what we want to be able to do, is to say, let's just take a much more broad brush to who's developing solutions, products, and services, and then let's try to match them up. I think there's two benefits to that. One is the fact that right now, all the benefits go to entrepreneurs who are in California or the East Coast, or London or places like that. And if you think about climate change, everybody can't run to the Bay Area to find a solution. Like you need to like build stuff, and so you need really good companies around the world that are building seawalls or reducing pollution from factories. And so I think part of it is just to say we need to do more and we need to do it faster. So having that global network is important for that reason. And then the second is, I think there's a lot of great stuff that comes out of what they call the global South. And so outside of the United States, outside of Europe, a lot of cool tech, a lot of cool businesses, and we tend to ignore them in the sort of the U.S. model. And so it's great to just to give those folks some airtime, give them a chance to talk about what they're doing, and hopefully help them to grow and succeed.
Are there any cool, speaking of airtime, is there any cool ones that you want to mention?
I think I just saw one that came out of the University of Illinois that was that can use air particles to evaluate whether there's viruses nearby. And so when you think about COVID, and we were all worried about how do you get the virus, these folks have figured out how to have monitors essentially, in your home, in your office, probably eventually as part of your cell phone, some sort of monitor to let you know if there's a virus nearby based on the air particles. And so, that's amazing, right? That's, that's the kind of thing where you say, wow, that's not only is it cool tech, and they should be able to get venture funding, but like the implications of that could be enormous. We wouldn't need another, shutdown the way we all had to go through during COVID-19, if we had our own alarms to let us know that, Mikey, you should stay away from Nish because Nish is, he's
Right.
sick, right?
Yeah.
So just really cool stuff that way. And I think there's 100 things like that.
Yeah.
Another separate one, that was a US one, but a one in Brazil was tracking, based on AI and photos and other things, able to track, literally the number of birds of a species in the Amazon, and the number of alligators of a certain species. And so,
Cool.
again, really important stuff needed that the world needs to, figure out if we're doing the right thing or not.
So you guys are all over the field.
Yeah. So our organizing principle is around the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17 goals in total, really 16 goals or even less as it relates to topics, but it covers education, gender equality, healthcare, climate change, agriculture, a lot of different topics. So we use the Sustainable Development Goals as our organizing mechanism in terms of topics. But I'll tell you, like, probably 70% of our work ends up being climate change and sustainability, and maybe 20% is global health, and then education, sort of media democracy, migration, all those sorts of things are the other 10%.
Okay. What are you most passionate about?
That's a great question. I think the global health stuff is super exciting because the reality is we already have a lot of technology and a lot of knowledge about how to prevent a lot of health problems, right? So there's just a lot of potential in medicine and healthcare, particularly with all the computer technology, computer power that people are looking at. So that is exciting to me that we can do a lot, even in our lifetime, in healthcare to make people healthier. And so that to me is, and then you see this stuff like with COVID, where the guy's like, hey, next time we'll be able to track it in the air in front of us. And you're like, wow, we can prevent that whole thing from happening. So that
Right.
excites me more than anything else. Also because the climate stuff is frustrating. I think there's a lot of innovation in that space, a lot of entrepreneurs, but we haven't seen as much traction from funders, investors. I just came back from Climate Week in New York,
Okay.
and it was like a week of a lot of talk, very little action on the climate side. So that is an area where obviously I think there could be excitement, but it's a little bit frustrating.
Can we unpack that a little bit?
I hope so. But I think some of that's on investors to take a chance
Okay.
on stuff. And I think with investors, obviously they're rightfully looking for a return, and a lot of the climate stuff, it's not clear what the business model is, where the return is going to come from, and so they're hesitant. And then stuff like sea level rising, like what's the business model, who's going to buy it, is it really an issue? It's really an issue, don't get me wrong, but it's for the investors, is it an issue they should worry about? So it's been really hard to get any movement there, and the politics of it, of course.
Yeah, well, that's a good maybe segue back to what this podcast is sort of about. And for me, like this idea of business and consciousness and mission driven, there, like the
Mm-hmm.
business aspect is the reality. And I think a lot of my whole journey is just swallowing that hard pill. And
Yes.
the business part is relevant. And you do have to have, strategy and business chops or that right team. And I think that's where, in my experience, a lot of people fall flat because there's so many, especially good creative people who mean well and want to change the world. And
Mm-hmm.
you have this idea and you start, but you're not an app developer and you're not a business guy. You're someone with a lot of passion,
Yeah.
right? But you don't get it there. And then on the flip side, you might have these people who do have those teams. And per your point, there's still not really a business model. Is there a give and take of like, look, this thing won't make money, but it's going to make real impact, and that's okay? And or you
Yeah.
help them navigate that. Yeah, I know that's a
Yeah.
broad
It's
questions.
it's definitely both. I'll give you an example. In education, for example, if you're doing K through 12, it's almost always nonprofit because public schools in most of the world will not allow for-profit companies into the school because they want advertising to kids and stuff like that. And that's I think most of us would agree that's generally a good thing. We don't want sponsors coming in to with 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and pitching their thing. So in that case, it's almost always nonprofit. But if you have a tool that helps kids learn math better, by all means, we need every school in America to have it. And
Sure.
so that whole thinking about how do you grow it, that's a business mindset. That's thinking, okay, how do I keep my costs as low as possible? How do I keep innovating so this product is really cheap so that the poorest school district in America can afford it, and the richest school district can buy 10 copies of it, whatever.
Mm.
But that they really think about cost, that they really invest in the team. Just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you don't need a chief operating officer or a chief financial. Like, you need all those things. And so
Yeah.
even if it's something like that we could call a public good, that the public needs, you need those systems and operating, you need management practices, all of that stuff. And then you got to convince government that, this is the way we scale. And then, but then once you do, that's how you scale, right? So you sign the New York City schools, and boom, all of a sudden you got hundreds of thousands of users for your education software, and then you can scale, right? Then you call Chicago and LA and say, hey, we're doing this. So
Yeah.
I think the pathway to scale is in many ways the same, but you need this infrastructure. The example I always give with the nonprofit side is, you take a place. If you're a nonprofit, you can have huge influence. You can have huge, impact over the long term. All of those things, and you can grow quite large. If you think about like the Catholic Church or Harvard University or Scripps Hospital, in California, these are all nonprofits. They're hugely influential. They're big. They do path-breaking research. But if you want to do speed and scale, not take hundreds of years like the church or
Mm.
something, if you want to do it fast in our lifetime, the for-profit model is the only way to go. It's the
Sure.
only thing that scales that fast. And so, you got to figure out what that is and how are you going to do it. And, in the education example I use, that same software might also work for people who've graduated high school, guys like you and me who want to reskill ourselves. And so maybe that's where you make your money and you subsidize the other, or maybe you focus first on the older people, and then you figure out what to do with K through 12. Like, there's a lot of ways to think about it.
Yeah.
But if you want to do it fast, you have to have the business mindset and the business model. And we do share that with everybody we work with. The interesting thing is on things like, sea level rising, there sometimes you pitch differently. You say to governments, look, you need to do this now. We don't have 20 years,
Mm.
to build a business in Boston that holds the sea back, and then we sell it to, people in Florida or in Brazil or India. Like, we got to do it now because the sea level is rising, and Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard are, disappearing. So we got to do this now, and we have to share it now. And so I think there's certain things, the COVID vaccine being a similar example. Like, we did it fast, right? There's nothing about we'll try it here. If it works, we'll sell it to your discount, or it was like, we're going to do it everywhere and we're going to do it fast. So sometimes you got to do that, and there won't be a business model. They'll just be, do it, right?
An emergency. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's fair.
exactly.
Yeah. The nonprofit for profit thing is interesting because each, there's like a yin and yang to, I guess, each side,
Mm-hmm.
because I assume that the nonprofit like rules or red tape exist for a reason, so that if you're a nonprofit, you are, staying true to your mission. But at the same time, just be for profit, and then you don't have to worry. Maybe per your point, you make a lot quicker progress,
Yeah,
but without said rules and regulations, now you are allowed to turn evil if you want
yeah,
to.
right,
Like,
right.
is that so? What's the solution? Because I've also there's always been this interesting thing to me that, like, the CEO of a nonprofit making $1 million, oh, you're taking away from the nonprofit. Maybe true, okay, but the CEO of like someone literally selling poison, making billions, good work. Take more. Here's more billions of dollars, right? Like,
Yeah,
sell us more poison.
it is. It's really antiquated thinking that we have. And so, and you think about when a lot of these nonprofit laws were written, it was very local. Like, you gave to your local United Way. You were mostly focused on people who were poor, who didn't have enough food, or needed health care, and covered basic stuff. Like, we didn't think about these global issues. We didn't think about R&D for clean water. We just thought about it much more simply. So when it was written, it was like, hey, I'm going to give $100 to these orphans have lunch, I'm going to take that $100 off my taxes because you, the government, were supposed to do that and you didn't. And everyone said, okay, that's fine, let's do that. But now we're in a world where we're dealing with much, much more complexity, and so I'm hoping one day people think about that differently and say, all right, let's look at this differently. Like, let's look at the problem we're trying to solve and what's the incentive to get people to solve this problem where they may not make a profit, right? So maybe it's that their streets are safer and it's a public good that way. Maybe it's something else. But I think there's going to need to be some thinking differently, particularly on things like a pandemic or climate change and sea levels rising. Like this whole model of I want a tax benefit, so I'll support this group, or I want a return, so I'll support this company. Like we're going to have to change some of our thinking on these big topics.
How do you think we make progress, or how do you think we cut through the noise, given that you've sort of been on the ground floor? Is there a solution, or is it let's just keep doing our best, everybody?
Yeah, generally, I think it's let's keep doing our best. I think if I was to look at a couple of things that need to get done, I think I think from the tactical side, there's things like philanthropy needs to spend more money than it spends. These big foundations sit on billions of dollars. They spend by law only 5% of it per year. The rest is invested, and so like go spend it, go solve the problems. Don't try to live in perpetuity. So there's tactical issues like that. Make it easier for profit companies that are just starting to raise money from philanthropy as investment. So there's a lot of tactical things that I think can unlock capital for the business sector. Governments can make the compliance issues less for small businesses, and the tax and all that stuff, make it easier for innovators and startups. So there's a lot of tactical things. I think big picture things, there's got to be a realization that the stock price should not be the only factor driving how a company operates. And so if the whole world thinks climate change is bad and we got to do something about it, then the whole world should accept a slightly lower earnings in a quarter if that company is spending a lot to clean up their facilities and reduce their footprint, right? So sure. That's like a societal change that's required. That might be too much to ask of the world, but if you're gonna change, that's one of the things we're gonna have to change how we think about earnings per share and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's also a communications issue, because I heard something that stuck with me, that if you're speaking to the red team, you don't talk about global warming, you talk about reducing dependence on foreign oil. If you're speaking to the blue team,
and resilience,
global warming, right? Both are achieving the same goal, right? It just takes a level of consciousness to think about, well, what is this community that we're speaking to prioritize, right or wrong, and who's to say?
Yeah,
this group of people cares about this the most. Well, okay, if we know that we need to advance this goal, which is what we care about is global warming, but good news is it also reduces dependency on foreign oil. So how can we communicate those things?
Right. Yeah, that's a big part of it. I think part of the question becomes, well, okay, you're sitting there in Boston, you're sitting there in California, you're successful, wealthy parts of the country. You can all put in solar panels, but if we lose our job as coal miners, if we lose our jobs, in the oil industry and fracking, what are we going to do? We'll go along with your changes if you're helping us to transition. And far too often we are not, thinking about who's gonna get hurt by this. That's one of the things we do really poorly politically as we think about these big problems. And and the business sector there also could do better, because I think they naturally tend to set up in places that have the lowest costs, which in the short term is fine, but it's a race to the bottom. Then you set up your factory in Georgia, and then Mississippi gives you lower tax break, so you fire all those people, you move to Mississippi, and then so on and so forth. And so everybody as a sector, I think, in being more responsible about thinking through the impact of what they're doing.
That's a great segue for closing, because I want to be mindful of your time. We're coming up on the hour, and thank you again, by the way. This was super fascinating. I appreciate you joining. So when we're talking about whether you're a coal miner or in an urban environment or in a city, like you're someone with an idea, do you have any advice for someone to get past even to the prototype stage or to that investment phase where they're actually being seriously considered by an accelerator? Like, how can people get off the ground?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there's a couple of ways people should think about it. So I think if you're talking about, um, a lot of entrepreneurs start as students. It's for their first time. I think if you're a student in America, particularly, or in India or any of these large countries, universities are a great place to start. Almost all of them have entrepreneurship programs to help build your idea, or they have researchers, faculty doing research who are trying to develop products. And so there's a whole set of programming that universities and others have. If you're not in that space, I think there's a couple of resources. I think there's, um, you know, most in the US, the Small Business Administration has business development centers pretty much, in every congressional district in America. It's over 400. And, they are a great resource to help learn what a business plan is, learn what type of money might be available, whether it's bank loans or venture capital, whatever. And so really underutilized by some sets of entrepreneurs, but they're there. There's agencies like the Minority Business Development Agency, the SBA. Every state has these, so there's a lot of resources that people who have an idea can go. I think if it's the thing I would say is if it's a research based project or some sort of product, an invention, it's really critical to one, to make sure it works, and then secondly, to understand the regulation required around it. Obviously, if you're doing medical research, there's a lot of regulation. If you're doing a pen that's reduces carpal tunnel or reduces aches and pains, maybe you don't need any regulation, and you just sort of build it. You just got to make sure it doesn't leak ink, right? So you're figuring out what are the limitations, and you're building the product and make sure it works. That's primary for inventors. For people who have services, I think the lean startup model that was developed about a decade ago is really great. That you get out there, you just start talking to people, you share your product, see what people like, don't like, and quickly change it, and then go back and do it again. Again, that doesn't work for a cancer drug. I can't go out there and try it, see what works, what doesn't. But if you have a product, if you have software, if you have a service, you're cleaning cleaning homes, you're doing something like that, you have a website, by all means, do that. Get 2 clients, get the feedback, change it. Get 5 clients, get the feedback. Use HubSpot, use Salesforce, use different software out there, Zoho, and start to think about low-cost ways to really bootstrap and build, so that you don't necessarily have to, rely on outside investments. As you might know, venture capital goes to like just a few percentage points of the entrepreneurs. So it's not really an option for almost anybody. So then you're figuring out what else do you do. And,
Yeah,
and having worked it through is a big part of that.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, as someone who has been a part of many failed and a few successful startups, it seems to me that like we just got into the marketing space over the last 4 years, and that has been a journey in and of itself. And before that, I was a brand guy, and I always thought, make it beautiful and cool, and make a cool story around it, and they will come. But then you got to get them to see it and get them to care. And so that's when we started learning marketing, and I've sort of flipped, and it feels to me like it's better to build a community around a mission or an idea than to think about even the product yet. Like maybe you have a product you want to build, but first start like raising awareness, like see if you get people to care about the problem that product is solving, and then crowdsource that, build a community, because then you have a community of maybe investors too, right? Who are micro investors.
Yeah. And the whole, if you're Coca-Cola, you can't do that. You have to have it perfect out of the box, but then you have millions of dollars to do it with also. Whereas if you're a startup, people, are sort of endeared to what you're trying to do, and they don't hold it against you if it doesn't look perfect, right? They understand that. Almost everybody understands that, which is great.
Yeah. And to the contrary, like especially in TikTok, and I don't know what's going to happen with TikTok, but that's a community of people who want they don't want the final product. They want the messy, they want you on camera, like crying because like your shipment got delayed, because they want to be part of the story, not because they want to see the bad shit, but like it's a level of transparency, and then when you're in on the story, you're in on the product, and
Yeah.
so
And it's an experience that they
yeah,
feel like they're part of. That, hey, I was one of the first testers of this cool thing, and now everybody uses it. Right?
right,
It's a
yeah,
fun experience to have to go
totally,
along with what they see on TikTok and elsewhere.
yeah, before it was cool, the
Yeah,
ultimate
exactly. Yeah.
motto. Amazing. All right, Nish, thank you so much. I'm going to let you go, but I really appreciate it.
But just appreciate the chance to talk to you, and hopefully we'll get some good feedback from listeners and others, and I look forward to connecting again.